Welcome to the Explainer. If you've ever had a filling, you've actually experienced a little marvel of material science firsthand. But have you ever stopped to think what that stuff actually is? The stuff they use to patch up a tooth? Well, in this new series, we're going to break down the science of dental fillings, and we're starting with the absolute fundamentals right here in part one. Okay, let's just dive right in. The big question is, what's actually inside a tooth filling? And why in the world does it have to be so tough? I mean, think about it. The answer, it turns out, takes us into this surprisingly complex world of material science, and it's all happening right there inside your mouth. So, first things first, we need to get a handle on the main category these materials belong to. They're called direct fillings. And the subtitle here, the chairside solution, that's a huge clue. That little phrase tells you almost everything you need to know about the process. And here it is. That one word, direct, really says it all, doesn't it? What it means is the entire procedure, the whole shebang, happens in one single visit. The material gets mixed, it's placed right into the tooth, and it hardens, all while you're sitting right there in the dental chair. This really helps put it in perspective. You've got two main approaches. On the one hand, you have the direct restoration we're talking about today. It's all done in one go, chairside. But then there's the indirect method. That's a whole different ballgame. That's when something like a crown or bridge is custom made in a lab, and you actually have to come back for a second appointment to get it fitted. So one visit versus two, big difference. Okay, so why do we even need fillings and restorations in the first place? What are these materials really up against? Well, it usually boils down to three main culprits. And here they are. First up, you have dental caries. That's the fancy term for what we all know as a cavity. Pretty straightforward. But look at the other two. Trauma. That could be anything, right? A sports injury, chipping a tooth, especially those front ones. And then there's wear. This is the slow, sneaky one. It happens over years from things like brushing way too hard or even just from your diet. Think acidic foods and drinks. And this really gets to the heart of the challenge for dental scientists. Think about it. A big molar in the back of your mouth needs to be an absolute tank to handle all that chewing. But a tiny chip on a front incisor? Aesthetics are everything. It has to look perfect. This tells you right away there's no single one-size-fits-all super material that's perfect for every single job. So with all these different demands, aesthetics here, strength there, how do you even measure success? What's the ultimate goal for any of these filling materials? Well, it all comes down to one critical thing: durability. Now, this is a really, really important point. Durability isn't just about how long the filling itself lasts, it's also about the life expectancy of the tooth around the filling. A truly great restoration doesn't just plug a hole, it has to protect and support the rest of the natural tooth. It's a two-part equation. All right, so if durability is the goal, how do we get there? Well, any good material has to tick a few very important boxes. Let's start with the first requirement, and it's one we can all relate to: appearance. And this really highlights a constant balancing act in dental materials. When you're talking about front teeth, the ones everyone sees when you smile, looks are everything. The material has to be a perfect match: color, shade, even the way light passes through it. But for back teeth, the heavy lifters, strength and resistance to wear and tear become the top priority. It's a classic case of beauty versus brawn. And then you have to consider the patient factor. Let's be honest, people today are way more aware of their options. They want fillings that look natural, even in the back where they're not as visible. This isn't just some small trend either. This patient demand has been a huge driver of innovation, really pushing scientists to cook up new materials that are both beautiful and incredibly strong. Okay, let's shift gears and get a little more technical. A material can look fantastic and be tough as nails, but if a dentist can't actually use it properly, well, then it's pretty useless, right? This brings us to the second requirement: handling and setting. Now, you're going to see this term, rheological properties. It sounds super complicated, I know, but all rheology means is the study of how stuff flows. In dentistry, it's about the practical questions. Is this material runny like honey, or is it thick like putty? Is it so sticky that it clings to the dental tools, or is it smooth and easy to sculpt? That's rheology in a nutshell. And you can see how these properties are critical at every single step of the process. First, during mixing, you want it to combine easily and thoroughly. Then, when it's time for placement, the dentist needs the perfect consistency. Some materials need to flow into tiny crevices, while others have to be dense enough to be packed in with pressure. And all of this has to happen before the final step, set. This brings us to working time, and you can literally think of this as the dentist's countdown clock. The second those components are mixed, that clock starts ticking. The dentist needs enough time, but not too much, to get the material in place, sculpt it perfectly to match the tooth, and get all the edges just right before it starts to harden. So if working time is for the dentist, setting time is really for the patient. This is simply the time it takes for the filling to get completely hard. And obviously, a shorter setting time is better for everybody. It means less time for you sitting in the chair with your mouth wide open, and it makes the whole appointment more efficient. Phew. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground already. So before we wrap up part 1, how about a quick knowledge check, just to see if it's all sinking in? I've got a question for you. All right, here it is. A dentist creates a restoration in their office, all in a single visit. What is this an example of? Is it A, an indirect restoration, B, a direct restoration, C, a rheological restoration, or D, a trauma restoration? Take a second and think back to what we just talked about. And the correct answer is B, a direct restoration. If you got that, awesome. Remember, the key is right in the name. It's placed directly into the tooth, all in one appointment. Fantastic. So what have we covered so far? We've learned that the ideal filling is way more than just a simple plug. It has to look good and it has to handle just right so the dentist can do their job. But honestly, we've only just scratched the surface. What about being strong enough to chew on? What about how it reacts to hot coffee or cold ice cream? And is it even safe for the body?
Today, we're going to dive into the absolutely brutal, non-stop gauntlet a simple dental filling has to survive and the incredible science that actually makes it possible.
So just think about it for a second. Where do we put highly engineered materials that have to put up with a constant barrage of chemical attacks, wild temperature swings, and just crushing forces, day in and out for years? Any ideas?
Well, you might be surprised to hear that the answer is your mouth. Seriously. It is one of the most hostile, chaotic environments we could ever design for. And a dental filling, it doesn't get a single day off. It has to work perfectly in this battlefield. So let's break down what it's really up against.
Okay, first up, chemical warfare. A filling has to be incredibly stable, because from the second it's placed in your tooth, it is under constant chemical assault from pretty much everything you eat and drink.
I mean, the sheer variety of threats here is just mind-boggling. We're talking about massive swings in pH, from the acid in your morning coffee to more basic alkaline foods. It's soaking in a huge range of solvents from everything we consume. For any metal fillings, there's the constant risk of corrosion, basically rusting in your mouth. And here's a really wild one. If you have different types of metal in your mouth, say an old silver filling and a gold crown, they can act like a tiny battery in your saliva, creating an actual electrical current. That can cause a sharp, zapping pain. So the material has to resist all of this without dissolving or breaking down.
So beyond all that chemistry, there's the physics. Every single time you sip a hot coffee or take a bite of ice cream, you're creating a massive thermal shock inside your mouth, and that little filling is right on the front lines.
Now, to really get this, we need to know a key term: thermal diffusivity. It's just a way of measuring how fast a material lets heat or cold travel through it. And for a filling, you want this number to be as low as possible. Why? Well, because the filling's job isn't just to plug a hole. It's supposed to act like a shield, protecting the sensitive, living pulp deep inside your tooth from those sudden temperature shocks.
And here's what that means in the real world. An ideal material has really low diffusivity, so it acts like a nice piece of insulation for your tooth. But some materials, like metal fillings, have high diffusivity. They transfer heat and cold really, really fast. And that's exactly why dentists might need to place an insulating liner underneath a metal filling to stop you from getting that horrible zinging pain every time you have a hot drink.
But being a good insulator isn't the only thermal problem we have to solve. There's another, much more subtle challenge called the coefficient of thermal expansion. It sounds complicated, but it's a really simple idea. It's just how much something grows when it gets hot and shrinks when it gets cold.
So here's the critical part. The filling material needs to expand and contract at almost the exact same rate as your natural tooth. But what happens if they don't? What if that filling expands way more than the tooth when you drink some hot soup? Well, you get a failure right at the edge. A tiny, microscopic gap can open up right between the filling and the tooth. And that gap is bad news. It allows fluids and bacteria to leak right in, which can cause sensitivity and, even worse, new decay right underneath the filling. It's such a tiny detail, but it has huge consequences for how long that filling's going to last.
All right, so we've covered chemicals and we've covered temperature. Now for the brute force. Your jaw can exert some incredible pressure when you chew, and that filling has to withstand those forces thousands and thousands of times a day without cracking or deforming.
And not all fillings are created equal, mainly because not all teeth do the same job. Your back teeth, the molars, they're for grinding. They need a material that has incredible strength and can resist getting slowly squashed out of shape over years and years, a process called creep. But your front teeth, they face less force, so a bigger concern for them is abrasion from things like toothbrushing. That means the material needs to be super wear-resistant.
This brings us to another key property, the modulus of elasticity. And put simply, this is just a measure of stiffness. A material with a high modulus, like steel, is very stiff and it resists bending. A material with a low modulus, like a rubber band, is super flexible. So for a filling, stiffness is a huge advantage. When you bite down, you absolutely do not want the filling to flex or deform even a tiny bit. Because if it does, it can break that all-important marginal seal we just talked about, creating another tiny doorway for leakage. A stiff material transfers that load without changing shape, keeping that seal nice and tight. So let's recap. The material has survived chemicals, temperature, and force. We are almost at the finish line, but there are two final hurdles in this gauntlet: adhesion and biocompatibility. Basically, it has to stick in place, and it has to be completely safe for you. First, let's talk adhesion. A strong chemical bond is a total game changer. It doesn't just hold the filling in, it provides the ultimate microscopic seal against leakage, basically making the filling and the tooth one seamless unit. This modern approach also often means the dentist can be more conservative and remove less healthy tooth structure. And then there's biocompatibility. This one is absolutely non-negotiable. The material has to be completely harmless to you and your dentist, with nothing that could leach out and irritate the sensitive, living pulp of the tooth.
Okay, I know that was a ton of science, so let's just pause for a second and do a quick knowledge check to see how these ideas connect.
Here's the question for you. A large mismatch in which property is the one that causes that microscopic fluid leakage when you're drinking something hot or cold? Is it A, modulus of elasticity, B, coefficient of thermal expansion, C, chemical solubility, or D, abrasion resistance? Just think back to that hot coffee example.
And the correct answer is B, the coefficient of thermal expansion. That's the one that governs how much a material expands and contracts with temperature. A mismatch there is what causes those tiny gaps to form at the edges.
So when you think about it, a dental filling has to be a true superhero material. It's got to win battles on chemical, thermal, and mechanical fronts all at the same time. It's just a fascinating challenge in material science.
And that wraps up our look at the gauntlet of challenges a dental filling has to face. Dental history, the story of something called silicate cement. This was the very first tooth-colored filling. It was a total game changer, but it was also deeply, deeply flawed. So let's dive into this forgotten material and see what surprising lessons it taught modern dentistry. All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll set the stage. What was the world like before white fillings? Then, we'll introduce our main character, the silicate cements. After that, we'll investigate a pretty painful mystery they created, uncover their surprisingly important legacy, and then we'll wrap up with a quick knowledge check to see what you've learned. Okay, so let's rewind the clock. Picture the early 1900s. If you got a cavity back then, your options for a filling were, well, let's just say they weren't exactly subtle. You were looking at a world of very metallic smiles. I mean, it's something we totally take for granted now, right? But for a very long time, the only choices you had were super noticeable. This created a huge, huge demand for something that could fix a tooth without, announcing it to the whole world.
So your choices were pretty stark. On one hand, you had gold foil. I mean, it was strong, it lasted forever, but it was incredibly expensive for most people and really tricky for the dentist to place. On the other hand, you had dental amalgam. Now, this was the affordable workhorse, but it was dark, it was metallic, and there were already some early concerns about its mercury content. There was this massive gap in the market for something that worked well and looked good.
And right into that gap stepped this brand new material that promised to solve the whole aesthetics problem once and for all. It's time to meet the silicate cements.
So what was this stuff exactly? At its heart, it was actually a pretty simple two-part system. You had a really fine powder, which was basically a special kind of glass, and then you had a liquid, which was a water-based phosphoric acid. You'd mix them together,
They'd form this paste you could pack into a cavity, and it would set hard with this translucent, glassy finish that looked a whole lot like natural tooth enamel.
Think of it like a very specific chemical recipe. The glass powder is your base, and the phosphoric acid is, of course, the acid. When you mix them, this acid-base reaction kicks off, and that's what hardens the material. But, and this is absolutely crucial, the whole reaction was incredibly sensitive. See that fourth step? Any little bit of moisture, like saliva, that got in while it was setting could completely ruin the filling, making it weak and easy to dissolve.
And this really gets to the heart of the silicate cement paradox. On the plus side, it was a massive win for aesthetics. And even better, it had this secret weapon. The glass powder slowly released fluoride over time, which actually helped prevent new cavities from forming around the filling. A huge and kind of accidental benefit. But the downsides? They were serious. The material was weak, brittle, and it would just dissolve away if it was exposed to acids from things like sugary drinks or just poor oral hygiene.
So you have this situation where patients love the way their new fillings looked, but a really troubling pattern started to show up. A lot of people who got these invisible fillings would later come back with pretty bad tooth pain. Some even ended up losing the tooth entirely. It was a real mystery.
This was the big question everyone in dentistry was asking. The material was a home run cosmetically, but something was going terribly wrong biologically. They had to figure out why this seemingly perfect solution was causing so much trouble just beneath the surface. And right away, there was a prime suspect. Just look at the recipe. Phosphoric acid. It was highly acidic, so the conclusion seemed totally straightforward. The acid from the cement must be seeping into the tooth and basically giving the sensitive pulp inside a chemical burn. It made perfect sense at the time.
But it turns out that theory was wrong. This is the big plot twist in our story. The old theory blamed acid trauma, but modern science revealed the real villain was something called microleakage. You see, the silicate cement never actually bonded or stuck to the tooth. That meant there was always this microscopic gap between the filling and the tooth, and that tiny gap acted like a superhighway for bacteria and fluids to leak deep down inside, causing constant irritation and pain. It wasn't a chemical burn at all. It was a full-on bacterial invasion.
Discovering the truth about microleakage was pretty much the beginning of the end for silicates. But their failure was not in vain. The lessons learned from this whole mess were the critical building blocks for all the modern tooth-colored fillings we have today.
This timeline really puts it all into perspective. Silicates had their day back in the early 1900s. By the 60s, new resin composites started to take their place. But look at the 1970s, the invention of glass ionomer cements. These are basically the direct descendants of silicates. They use a really similar glass powder and that same acid-base reaction, but they were specifically engineered to fix all the problems their ancestor had.
So here's the bottom line. The failure of silicate cements taught us some incredibly important lessons. We learned that stopping that bacterial superhighway, preventing microleakage, was way more important than how acidic a material was. We learned that getting a filling to actually stick to the tooth is non-negotiable. And we learned to appreciate that amazing side effect of fluoride release, which is now a feature in so many modern materials. Silicates were a flawed pioneer, for sure, but without their failures, we wouldn't have the amazing materials we rely on today.
All right, before we finish up, let's do a quick check-in to see if those key lessons stuck. Ready? First question, what did dentists back in the day think was the main reason for all that tooth pain from silicate fillings? Was it A, the material was too brittle, B, microleakage, C, the phosphoric acid, or D, allergic reactions?
And the answer is C. For decades, the accepted wisdom was that the strong acid was directly damaging the tooth. We know better now, but that was the leading theory at the time.
Okay, one more. What was that accidental superpower that silicates had, the one that heavily influenced materials that came later? Was it A, strong adhesion, B, releasing fluoride, C, high strength, or D, changing color?
And the correct answer is B, their ability to release fluoride. This was a truly game-changing discovery. Dentists noticed that even though the fillings had problems, there was way less new decay around them. That single insight has shaped dental materials ever since. So there you have it, the story of the forgotten filling. It's a perfect reminder that in science and medicine, sometimes our failures teach us more than our successes. It's a fascinating history.